Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws. This is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
Yeah, I don't know what the heck we just watched. This isn't a normal, intro or anything like that. I'm still flabbergasted. But we are here with a live, I guess, post game reaction and post game discussion of Knicks Pacers game one. And I'm just still in disbelief of what I just saw. But before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
What's up, Miami Heat Zone?
What's up, bro?
Let's go. Yes, let's go. Game one of the Eastern Conference Finals between the Knicks and the Pacers just wrapped up with the Pacers 138-135. Crazy game. I mean, just the fact that the Pacers take a 1-0 lead in this series. I'm gonna be honest. It's funny because in the first quarter, we saw a lot of good from the Indiana Pacers, right? Because they hit like their first 7, 8, 9 shots, right? But the Knicks kept matching and matching and matching, eventually took the lead and pulled away for most of the rest of the game, right? And the Pacers were never completely out of it, right? But it felt like the Knicks offensively were able to get whatever they wanted to. They were getting offensive rebounds, right? They were able to get out in transition when they needed to. You got contributions from obviously your two stars in Brunson and Towns, but you even got stretches from some of the other members of the supporting cast. But it was all for naught, right? With 2 minutes and 50 seconds to go, right? The Knicks are up, 14? There's some comments. Halliburton split in Brunson chopped cheese, and Zesty Cat couldn't get it done tonight. That's pretty funny. But it's funny because when the Knicks went up they went on a 16-1 run, right? Because Brunson was in foul trouble for stretches of the game. And he picked up his fifth foul, like early in the fourth quarter, right? Because the Pacers were like right there. They were basically like within like a couple buckets or whatever. And then the Knicks go on a 16-1 run to seemingly put the game away, right? This game felt like it was over once the Knicks made that run without Brunson, and like OG Anunoby got him some key possessions. Towns hit some big shots. And like I said, it seemed like it was done. I believe they went up by as much as 16, right? And then, like I said, they were still up by double digits with a couple minutes to go. And then just a complete collapse, right? And first off, you got to start off with Aaron Nesmith and tell Josh Hart his braids are too tight. Oh my goodness. But first off, start off with Aaron Nesmith because he was kind of the key guy that sparked the Pacers' ability to come back. 8 for 9 from 3, 30 points. And obviously he was guarding Brunson for some stretches. I mean, these guys, Nembhard and Nesmith, they were getting into foul trouble. Brunson's a tough guy to guard. And also, right, he's a guy that knows how to get to the free throw line, right? Like he's a guy that, is able to draw contact, and sometimes it's exaggerated, but he's a great scorer. But either way, right, you just kind of watch as the game goes on, and it's like, okay, all right, the Pacers, Nesmith's getting hot, but this game seems like it's over, and that the Knicks just have to hold on. And no, they did not at all, right? The offense completely disappeared. They got a couple buckets, right? But then they also had like a couple of bad possessions, right? Because you had both Towns and OG missing, splitting free throws at the line that would have probably put the game away. And then Halliburton, right, hits that ridiculous step back shot that looks like a 3. Miami Heat Network crazy. Yeah, that was a crazy comeback, right?
Wow.
Halliburton, he hits the step back shot, looks like a 3, kind of a la Kevin Durant, right? The Brooklyn Nets, the toe game 7. And then he does the Reggie Miller choke celebration to the crowd. No chopped cheese for Brunson tonight. Yeah, I mean, but what's up, y'all? What's up, Mr. Pops? But either way, it's just ridiculous. And then, what was even funnier, right, was we thought it was game over potentially, but then they looked back at it and it's a 2, right? So he does that celebration, but the game's not over, right? We got Trent and Martell in the chat. What's up, guys? Good to see you. And so the game's not over. So we have to see, all right, overtime, right? The Knicks, both teams have been pretty good in overtimes, right? And they've both been very good late in games. Let's see what happens. We should get a battle. And we did get a battle, right? Because the Knicks initially, right, scored the first few buckets in overtime. And then unfortunately, right, they made some really bad mistakes at the end of the game, right? They had a couple of bailout possessions where they were this close to turning the ball over on the inbounds. And then they got saved, right? Because Brunson got to the line. But then, right, there was that last possession, right, where Nemhard, credit to him with 5 fouls, right? He's fighting, he's competing defensively, and he's able to smack the ball off of Brunson's hand. Rick Carlisle, both of his challenges, he did a pretty good job, right? Because he had that one in the fourth, right, where it was Siakam and OG, right, that were kind of wrestling for the ball, and they were able to win that challenge, right, and the Pacers got the ball back. And then, of course, this challenge where they get the ball back off the Brunson turnover.
Mhm.
And then the Knicks seemingly, for whatever reason, decide not to foul. And again, I understand not fouling right away because we saw what happened with Oklahoma City, right, in that first game against the Nuggets where they fouled too early and that allowed the Nuggets to get right back into the game. Okay, OKC couldn't capitalize on the free throws, but the Knicks didn't foul at all, right? They ended up giving up a wide open dunk to Obi Toppin, where it was interesting, where he closed a decent amount in this game, right? Like they took Turner out at different points for different reasons, right? You know, I guess to kind of provide a little bit more of an interior presence, like as a fleet, I suppose, right? And Toppin was playing well at different spots. But just a complete blunder by the Knicks, and that's a bad loss because for most, right, this was like the best offensively they had looked all playoffs, right? I mean, this was easily their best offensive outing, right? I think they had a franchise record of points in the first half, right? And that was the 69 or whatever points they scored in the first half. So you got a great Brunson and Towns game. You got a decent. Well, I mean, Bridges kind of faded right towards in the second half. Most of his offense came in the first half, but defensively they had moments. But it's just tough. You got extra offensive boards from Mitchell Robinson, but the rebounding advantage went away for the Knicks as the game went on. Right, you didn't really get the same type of contributions. And then you look at the Pacers, you kind of look around and like Siakam for most of the game wasn't very good, right? You got a crazy Neesmith game. Turner was okay, but again, most of his work was done in the first half. And then Nemhard got some key baskets late, right? But didn't necessarily completely take over the game at different points like you thought he could. You didn't get a whole lot from Mathen, but you got contributions from a number of guys off the bench, and that's kind of the advantage the Pacers have. But this was one in the last, 2 minutes of the fourth quarter, and then the Knicks needed to hold on, and they ended up not holding on. So that's a tough loss for the Knicks. It doesn't mean that the series is over and that they're gonna completely lose the series. That's a bad loss, right? In a game where you controlled it for most of it, and now the Pacers, once again, just like we saw in the previous rounds, were able to steal a game that they probably had no real business winning. And now they're up 1-0, and now you gotta, you'll have to go back to Indiana at some point and steal a game since you couldn't hold on in New York. So great win by the Pacers, crazy win by the Pacers, which they've been able to do all season, right? But obviously against this Knicks team, right, this would be the best team that they faced so far this postseason, right? And just not great from the Knicks, right? Just complete collapse. I still think they can win the series, but not a good start. Not a great start. And it would have been a good win initially because, again, Brunson gets into foul trouble. You close the game without him, but then they couldn't close at the end of the game. And that's the tough thing about the Pacers. They're really good at that type of stuff.
Yeah, their depth is what I think, really scares you because, well, you look at the game over time, right? And, those TJ McConnell buckets and moments add up, as well with a guy like Obi Toppin as well. So, it's things like that that really do tick you off. I think if you did pick the Knicks to win this game and the series, because there's a lot on the line here, right? And that's the thing that really, I think, threw me off because they did such a good job throughout pretty much all four quarters up until the final 2 minutes. And they just, like you said, couldn't close offensively or defensively. They just weren't there mentally, I think, all the way. And I don't know. I think they got complacent. They thought they had the game in the bag, just like everybody else in the rest of the world. But clearly they didn't. And you do shout out Indiana for what they were able to
Yeah.
accomplish in this game. Shout out to Halliburton. He's been on a freaking like revenge tour post everybody calling him the most overrated NBA player in the league right now. So shout out to him and what he's been able to do and being the leader on this team. Shout out to Aaron Neesmith, for being a role player to step up. But respectfully, I think this was a fluke. The Knicks showed me throughout four quarters up until, that 2 minute mark, that they were able to dominate this team. And I think, if they can just replicate that throughout, the remainder of the series, and also, obviously close games and have Brunson out there and be able to, win the game. I mean, I think the series is pretty much over, but yeah, I think this is the best start possible for Indiana because nobody really
Mhm.
expected them to win this game, break out the cough syrup for the Knicks. Yeah, it was a choke job.
Yep.
Like that there's no other way to really put it. Uh, but respectfully, I still think it's a fluke because you give up those freaking 9 points to Neesmith. It's ridiculous. I think that's absolutely unacceptable from a Knicks perspective, defensively and then offensively, not taking care of the ball, not being able to close whatsoever. Like I don't know. Like as soon as it hit overtime, I feel like everybody's hearts kind of sank because you could feel that the momentum was definitely going to be shifting towards Indiana coming off that crazy game tying shot. So shout out to Halliburton, shout out to the Pacers, but this doesn't really change my mind on the series, I don't think.
Yeah, the Knicks with 15 turnovers and the Pacers with only 7, right?
Yeah.
And that's the tough part if you're the Knicks is that you don't want to lose a shootout type of game ideally, right?
Right.
Because of the fact that, you know, you are probably only going to have but so many games like that in this series. Now the Pacers defensively for a decent stretch of the game really didn't have much of an answer, right? Like Brunson, like I said, got to his spots, got wherever he wanted. Towns, pretty much same thing, right? Even got to the line, decent amount. Josh Hart, right, doing his thing in terms of rebounding and assisting. But again, like if you're the Knicks, look at the offensive rebounding battle, right? It was basically even, right? Knicks had 13 offensive rebounds, the Pacers have 11. That's not really a ton of what the Pacers do, right? They're kind of a one and done offensive team for the most part. So that can't happen. Obviously, you can't lose the turnover battle the way that they did, but even with all of that, they still had a chance to win this game. But I don't know. It's just like you said, like our pick for the series is for the Knicks to win it in 7. So I still think that there are plenty of things the Knicks can do to keep this series and turn it around. It's just not great to lose the first game
Horrible
of the
start.
series. Yeah, exactly, and especially in the fashion that they did. Right, that's the part that's really tough because I think you could see maybe not like 138 from the Pacers, right, but just as a whole, I think you could see some other guys like Siakam. I think could have a better game. I mean, the Knicks defensively did a decent job for most of it, being able to not concede certain switches,
I
right?
agree.
Or like even winning those matchups, right? Like Siakam wasn't able to score even on certain matchups, right? He had that one possession, right, where he got to the rim and got blocked by I think it was Deuce McBride, right? He
Yeah.
had the drive where it looked like he was going to dunk
Yeah.
and tear the rim off, right? And then he ended up getting blocked. So I think, it's funny because you look at this high scoring game, but I don't know. It's tough because the Pacers offensively can do a lot of different things. And this is what we talked about why we thought it was kind of a coin flip series.
Yeah.
Because unlike Boston, right, Indiana offensively has a pretty balanced distribution of shots, right? I mean, like they'll take threes, but they're not a super high volume 3-point shooting team. But they'll also take a lot of mid ranges. They'll get to the rim. Of course, they're great in transition. So there's a lot of stuff to like offensively about what the Pacers can do against this Knicks team. So I think defensively they're going to be tested. So this could just be a high scoring series, but as a whole, yeah, it was a choke job, but you know, you still have to give a ton of credit to the Pacers, right? Cuz cuz like they looked like they had no shot. Tripping Pacers winning the finals. What do you think about that?
No. I think that's a BS. I don't like that take, respectfully. I don't know. I just don't think that even if they do go, they're gonna have to face either OKC or Minnesota, and I don't think they have the firepower to contend with either of those teams. They're not
Yeah.
better than Oklahoma City. What? I don't know about that. What do you think? I completely disagree.
Uh
The
I feel like
Pacers?
okay. No, I feel like Oklahoma City's the better team.
Yeah,
I
come
mean, I
on,
guess
bro.
I think the question, and again, like we don't know if that's going to be the finals match. But the main thing for Oklahoma City is their defense first, right? So whoever they play, they're going to have to shut that team down
Yeah, they're too
on
versatile.
on the defensive end, and they can do it. But that's not the series right now. So obviously both teams got the Pacers and the Knicks, and then obviously the OKC and the Wolves. They got to focus on this series first.
OKC went to 7 with the injured Nuggets team. Shout out to the Nuggets, bro. Like they Knicks is Yeah, yeah, that's the growing sentiment among NBA fans
Yeah,
is the Knicks are garbage.
yeah, I think I remember him in this chat. So
Yeah, so shout out to you for popping out,
right,
but I don't know, bro. I think you have to tip your hat to the Nuggets more so in that
yeah,
series, because
yeah. It's
they
all
they
about
play.
matchup.
Yeah, they played a very very good series. I think Jokic had a good series. Towards the end, J Dub is trash. Be for real. I don't think he's trash. I think he's just a little inconsistent. Like because when he gives you, well, yeah, you just said it exactly. He can't stay consistent, but that doesn't mean he's trash. Like I would say like when he's on, it's amazing. Like they're the best team in the league. But when he's off, it's bad. But that doesn't mean like they're not going to win because that's the beauty of a 7 game series. Like he can afford to have a couple of bad games because if he pops off for one or two of them, they're going to win those. So I don't know. I just feel
Yeah,
like they're a little bit. I don't know. I feel like they're so stacked, and Indiana's stacked too, but in a different way.
and that's why and the Pacers are deep. OKC's too, and that's one of the reasons why. Like, I don't think, and that's one of the reasons why, even though we picked the Knicks to win the series, like I think it'll go 7 if the Knicks win, just because I think Indiana's going to have games like these where they're going to catch fire. And if you can't match them offensively, you're not going to win. But the thing was, the Knicks held them held them intact for most of the game. It was just the last 5 minutes of the game just completely blew it. Now I'm just mad OKC beat Nuggets. Last chance for Russ. LOL. Yeah, he's got a player option, so we'll see. I'm gonna assume he picks it up, right? Because he
Yeah,
played well for them. But either way, but back to this game, just a lot of crazy moments in this game overall, right? First off, that Knicks crowd, very awesome to see for a decent stretch. Um, just absolutely brutal collapse, and then they went completely quiet. Um, is this karma at all potentially for that weird stuff that happened? What with the trash and whatnot, where they were throwing trash at the fan,
it's oh yeah, the Pacers fan who for some
right?
reason was walking around
Or
the
the
middle.
Windhorse thing?
No, I don't think it's
No,
karma. I
no,
like I
just
said,
no.
I think it's more
I
so of a fluke, bro. And I know that might be kind of just brushing off Indiana and it's
Dodger, the
karma.
chosen one, says it's karma.
I don't think it's karma. I think it's a fluke. It's lack of execution as well.
The
Late game.
basketball guys.
Like you shouldn't like. There's no reason that you lost a game pretty much to 9 points of Aaron Neesmith hitting contested threes, and then also Halliburton, that's a wild shot too. And they're really freaking lucky that the game wasn't over right there. Like, come on, man. That's wild. Like the fact that his toe pretty much was the reason why they went to overtime and not didn't win the game is kind of wild. So the Knicks got lucky and then unlucky as well. So just wild that they couldn't
Yeah, because that's
capitalize
the
on
tough part.
anything, bro. And it's Tyrese Halliburton's the second best point guard in the East. I mean, I don't really have a problem with that take. I'm a big
Yeah, because I guess
Halliburton fan. I think we
yeah,
even
because
talked about that in the beginning of the season. Like people were dogging him for
yeah,
having a horrible struggle. It's like, bro, he was hurt. Brunson is one.
Brunson's
I
one.
agree with that. I don't have
Yeah,
a problem with that
I'd say
take.
so. Yeah. So I think that's and that's kind of one of the cool things that we were hoping to see with this series, right? Because both guys were really good in this game, right? Because we mentioned Neesmith, but obviously Halliburton as well. 31 points, 11 assists, right? Hits some threes. He shot 4 for 12, but hit all the big shots, right?
Yeah,
And that's kind of the key thing that, of course, outside of Neesmith, I got to support the Knicks for my friends and family. Well, hopefully they'll be able to recover after this game because this one was a tough loss for the New York Knicks. Just tough, but I think they can still win this series. Is just when you have your two best guys combined for what 78 points, like usually you should win that game, and they should have won this game. Knicks lose game two, it's over.
I agree.
I agree. I
Yeah,
100% agree because last series, right? When the Celtics went down 0-2, right? Like obviously like I picked the Celtics to win the series, right? So I thought they could come back. But when you go down 0-2, especially like when you went down the same way as you did in game 1, that's where you feel like, "Oh, this might actually be really bad
yeah, they
because,
figured him out.
game 2 should be the response game, right? Like if you're the Knicks, you kind of have to come back and just blow them out in the second game. I think ideally, of course, if you win a close game, whatever, win's a win. But I just think you don't want to get into a shootout with the Pacers, right? Pacers started the game hot. Yeah, that's the tough part, right? Because like the Knicks, after that hot start by the Pacers, right? The Knicks, went back in front, kept them in check. But that's the tough part. Is this is not a team you want to get into a shootout against because they can score from, as we said at the beginning of the stream, everywhere. Because it's not just threes; it's the rim, the mid range, in the post. Right, they got a lot of different guys that can contribute. And it's funny, right? Because when you look at that backup big situation, right? Because they brought Thomas Bryant in and he stunk, right? But when you think about their backup center situation, right? They started the season off with what was it, Wiseman and Isaiah Jackson.
Yeah,
Then both guys tore their Achilles.
yeah.
So then they traded for Thomas Bryant from the Heat, if I'm not mistaken,
Mhm.
right? But Obi Toppin, he might have to play small ball center for the Pacers at different points because I just don't know how much Bryant can really give you. I mean, he's a high motor guy, but
Yeah,
I
he's
don't
not
know.
good.
It's kind of tough to have him out there, especially when the Knicks have, Mitchell Robinson just gobbling up every
Yeah,
offensive rebound.
and Thomas Bryant can't defend either. Like I think everybody
No,
is okay, I guess, with his offensive aspects of his game, but the defense is where it's like, bro, you're unplayable, borderline.
right. But he was also like 1 for 3, made a
Yeah,
couple free throws.
yeah,
Like not didn't he was a -11,
right.
right? He was a -11 in a game that the Pacers won by 3. So that's not a great sign. And we've talked about plus minus can sometimes be misleading, but you could watch, and that's why he didn't close, right? I guess to your view, why do you think that Miles Turner was kind of like in and out in the fourth quarter? Was he hurt? Because he wasn't in foul trouble, but like, why do you think strategy wise the Pacers did that?
Yeah,
Or
that's a
was it
good
just kind of like
question.
what we were talking about, like in terms of like, because I thought maybe they put Toppin in just to give more rim pressure, just as a guy that could attack. But is there something you saw that might have been a difference?
That's what I was thinking. I was more on the lines of, they got to kind of make things tough for the Knicks on the interior aspect of it because, you look at it, Karl Anthony Towns is not a rim protector by any means, right? So you're going to have to put pressure
Right.
on the wings to close out, in the paint, but that also, takes guys away from the perimeter and can open up shots there. So I thought that's kind of what it was, like you said, more so not necessarily drive and kick, but more, attacking the rim. That's what I
Hmm.
think it was. But it is interesting that they were able to kind of get away with that and win in a scenario like
Yeah.
that. And that proves, just how deep they are and how versatile that they are as well, because
Right.
depth definitely does equal versatility.
Yeah, Benedict Mathurin came in, got to the line, but didn't really do a whole lot. Like, and again, like the plus minuses are going to be all over the place because they went down by a
Well,
ridiculous
yeah.
amount.
Yeah.
And then, they had the other guys and they came back into the game. So, not a whole lot to read from that. But, game two, Knicks, what do they need? Like, are there adjustments that they're going to have to make? Or is it more so just kind of literally just don't blow the game in the last 2 minutes?
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, I loved everything they did throughout all four quarters up until those last 2 minutes, right? I love what they did offensively. You're going to your go to guys, throughout the whole entire game, 1-2 punch combo, pick and roll, pick and pop, whatever the case may be. Cool. That's amazing. The wings, I think they showed up. They had their moments for sure. Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, they were hitting their shots, at certain stretches of the game. You had the Deuce McBride, I guess spurt points as well. Mitchell Robinson, clean the glass,
Well,
like
campaign threes.
campaign threes, which we hadn't really seen, I think, since Detroit, which is wild. But, um, you know, I loved what they did offensively and defensively. I thought they did a good job too. The wings were rotating; they were being impactful. You did have Mitchell Robinson down there protecting the paint, Karl Anthony Towns as well. Like it wasn't a horrible game by the Knicks by any means up until the last once you get under 2 minutes, and that's where I think it matters because all your hard work pretty much got erased within a matter of seconds, and that's
Right.
unacceptable. In the
Yeah, I mean,
playoffs, so you got
that
to find a way to close out the game and execute better in the fourth quarter because that's
yeah,
that's just unacceptable.
it kinda looked like what happened with the Celtics against the Knicks, right?
Right.
Just the difference was, like, offensively, the Knicks weren't bad in this game, by any stretch, but just in the last 5 minutes, right, that's been the strength of this Knicks team. But, unfortunately for them, that's also the strength of this Pacers team. Like Miami Heat Network said, Pacers won't blow leads. I mean, if they have a lead late, yeah, like you probably have to feel pretty good if you're the Pacers, right? What are
Yeah.
they so far in these playoffs? I mean, they're what, 9-2,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I mean,
They're a great team.
and
You have to give it
yeah,
to
and
them.
Right, and the Knicks are, I guess, what, like 8-4?
Yeah.
So,
Look at the
yeah, which is still
opponents though.
yeah, which is yeah, exactly. So that's how you got to look at it. Like, you still have to win 4 out of 6, so that's not great, including at least now one on the road. So, but we know the Knicks can go out on the road and steal potentially a couple of games, right? But obviously the Pacers already did the hardest thing is win game 1. So right now the Pacers are in a better spot, but again, not going to panic necessarily until it's game 2
No.
and the Knicks go down 0-2. Because if that happens, yeah, then I mean, I don't think they're going to pack it up, but you're not going to feel great about that,
Yeah,
right? So,
it's gonna be the writing will be on the wall at that point. I think the
yeah.
series will
And
be
for,
over.
right. And for the Pacers, right, you got to think about it this way, right? They've heard a lot of talk over the last year or so, right, about how they were kind of like Boston, where they kind of went through a lot of teams that had injuries, right? Because
Hmm.
like last year, no Giannis,
Hmm.
right? And then I guess who was the team that they faced in the second round? Wasn't it the Knicks, right? And then
Yeah,
the
it was
Knicks
the
collapsed
Knicks. Yeah, the
with the
Knicks
injuries
lost all
right
their
in the
guys.
second
Yeah,
round. Randall was already out. Then
yeah,
OG got hurt, I think,
yeah,
in one of the first
yeah,
games. Brunson was done, and
yep,
Robinson, I think, was done, by the latter part of the series.
yeah.
So they were losing everybody, right? And obviously for them, now they get to play against this Knicks team again, who made big moves to improve their team, right? And now both teams are healthy.
Yeah.
So that's the good thing is that at least right now, knock on wood, both teams seemingly are healthy. But I don't know. I mean, this is why we thought that this would be a long series because the Pacers are really good, even though yeah they've gotten some luck to go their way with some of these matchups. But give them credit, they compete because they've had some games where they're down and they could easily just kind of pack it in, and they don't. And that continued, and that kind of showed why the Pacers are a super strong team.
I'm
It's just
scared.
it's
I'm
funny.
scared when the Knicks go on the road. That's I think when the series is really going to start to matter for me. I feel like
Yeah, it's funny because they got what 3 wins in Detroit in the last series, right? Because they won games 3 and 4, and then they won game 6, right?
Mhm.
So they and then obviously they won what 3 games in Boston
Mhm.
or 2 games in Boston. Two
They
games. In
stole
Boston.
they
Yeah,
stole the first two.
yeah, and then they got blown out in game 5. So or game 5. So
Yeah.
yeah, so they've been really good on the road. Honestly, better on the road probably than at home. But
Still
just as a
Indiana. Oh God.
right. So
Good
we'll
luck.
see what happens in game 2. But man, it's just rough. I mean, because you just can't lose a game like that. And then also 28 for 40. Hadn't even mentioned this. They missed 12 free throws in the game, and it wasn't like it was Mitchell Robinson, right? Because I mean, he was 0 for 2. But again, the Pacers didn't do the intentional fouling Hacker Robinson, right? They just kind of played it straight.
Mhm.
Um, and again, like nobody shot like garbage necessarily from the line, but it's just like collectively, right? Like OG was 2 for 4, 50%. And then Hart was 1 for 2, not that big of a deal. And then Towns and Brunson, they only missed 2. But again, some of the misses late really cost them. Like Towns missed one, OG missed one. Just I don't know. It just the Pacers played a flawless last 5 minutes of the game, and then the 5 minutes in overtime. Even actually at the start of overtime, the Knicks initially looked like they would probably pull it out, and then you're like, wow, the Pacers had a chance to win it in regulation, but nope, they took advantage of the moment.
Yeah.
So do we think that because it felt like Carlisle was looking for answers at different points, right? Kind of, I think he ended up playing like
10
ten
guys.
guys,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, 10 guys. Does Jarris Walker potentially get any minutes?
Depends. I I
'Cause if
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, because the only thing is that, like, if you're either A, not going to play Thomas Bryant, and then B, go with Toppin potentially as the backup 5, like, it feels like you might want a little bit more collective size and length off the bench. But, how much is he going to really give you? I don't know, right? So that's just kind of a
I would
question.
probably
Because I
play
think
Ben Shepherd more than Jerace Walker at that point. I don't know.
Yeah, because I feel like even with the Pacers winning this game, I think there's probably certain adjustments that they'll ideally need to make so that way they don't go down big. I mean, actually we didn't even talk about the Pacers collapse, right? Because they kind of helped the Knicks go up big because of all the mistakes they made, right? The turnovers,
Yeah.
the missed shots,
Yeah.
the stupid fouls, right? I think they fouled a 3-point shooter twice, right? Like I think what was it? Nemhard
Towns.
fouled. McBride, and then I think
Somebody fouled
Neesmith fouled
Towns.
Town.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's 6 free throws off of stupid mistakes. I don't think they made all 6, but I think
No.
they made 5 out of 6.
Hmm.
So just as a whole, I think the Pacers can be better than what we saw in game 1. So that's kind of the worrisome part if you're the Knicks, right? So you've got to be able to close these games out. So we'll see what happens. But what a game! I mean, would you say this is the best game of the postseason?
Yeah, I would go as far as to say that because I think you got magical moments from both sides, and the overtime, I think was actually pretty solid, right? You got kind of got like a back and forth, up and down to the wire. It's just the Knicks couldn't really execute, and then obviously, shout out to Halliburton once again. Can't stop singing that guy's praises, for even sending it to overtime in the first place. It was either going to be OT or a game winner, and either outcome was good for Indiana.
Yeah, your stars showed up in this game.
Yeah,
So,
big time.
and then like I said, for Indiana, you need Siakam to be better. Like, I mean, he made some buckets late, but by and large, he was not great in this game.
Yeah,
So he's gonna have to be better. But I think defensively, they did a decent job against him, forcing him into a lot of tough shots, and they held up on those possessions where he got some smaller guys on him. So
yeah,
it seems like they maybe have gotten that under control because if he starts to play really well consistently, that's going to be a problem. We talked about that matchup. So, so far, not good for the Knicks to go down 0-1, but I don't think the series is over.
yeah.
So,
I don't think so either.
then I guess we can also, since we're here, we can talk about game 1 the other night between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? With the Thunder winning that one 114-88 to go up 1-zip in that series, Western Conference Finals. So, obviously the key thing here is held Minnesota to 88, but it's funny because through the first half, right, the Wolves were playing better, right? I think they had a 4-point lead in the first half. Julius Randle, I think, had 20 at halftime, and you didn't have like a crazy Ant game, but I think he was already in double figures. I want to say he had like 13 or so in the first half. But the concern to me, if you were Minnesota, was you're only up 4, and SGA and Jalen Williams offensively were pretty bad in that first half, right? Like SGA was like 2 for 13, right? And then Jalen Williams was, having another one of those 3 for 16 type performances in the first half. So their two best, guys essentially were awful in the first half offensively, and they were only down 4. Then in the second half, SGA took the game over, right? Finished with 31 and 9, 3 steals. Also today, shout out to him, he got the MVP, right? That was leaked today, right, by Shams Charania. Before it was announced on live on TV, right? But we kind of already knew he was going to end up winning that one. But for OKC, defense, defense, defense. Caruso once again took some tough matchups. He guarded Randall at different points. He guarded Ann at different points, right? I mean, he was guarding pretty much everybody. And obviously, we know he guarded Jokic down the stretch of that Nuggets series. So, pretty much seeing mostly what you want to see from Oklahoma City. Even Chet Holmgren
Yeah,
got
yeah,
some good
yeah.
moments in the fourth quarter, right? Because this was a close game through the first 3 quarters, right? It wasn't like, even though the final score was a blowout, OKC didn't really pull away until late in the third quarter, early in the fourth, right? So, kind of a big thing there. They forced Minnesota into 17 turnovers, mostly live ball turnovers, right? Because Oklahoma City had 13 steals. That's pretty much game over. That's going to happen. Minnesota took 51 threes, shot 29% of them. I know some of them were decent looks, but you still have to give credit to Oklahoma City defensively. I think I'll take my chances if I'm going to have DiVincenzo shoot 12 threes and Nikhil Alexander Walker shoot 9. Naz Reid was 0 for 7, so not great from that. But I think you'll take your chances if you're Oklahoma City and you're banking on those guys trying to beat you from 3, right? Because most of those guys aren't really necessarily creators, right? They're kind of playing off of some of these other guys. Let's go Heat from Najee, the chosen one.
Wait, what?
But
Let's go Heat.
yeah,
Wait,
yeah,
they're
that's
not
what he
even in the
said.
playoffs.
I mean, they're still repping their squads, right? So
I guess. I mean,
but either way, yeah. So, what do you think? I guess we should also just kind of mention this. So, what do you think of the discourse that's kind of been going on right now with Oklahoma City, right? Where there's
yeah.
been a lot of talk about them defensively fouling, mauling people, right, and getting away with it, and then on the other end, offensively, right, SGA. is able to get to the free throw line, kind of almost that. Well, what do you think of that discussion? Well, MVP led Thunder to an easy second half win, but what do you think of that discussion? Because it's been building, right? It's been
Yeah.
building, right? We've heard the free throw merchant talks, but what do you think?
I don't like the discourse surrounding this team at all because it's it's wild how far we've come in 1 year. Last year, everybody was so hype and happy about this team. Shea was being hyped up, to the maximum by all NBA fans, and he really didn't change his game from last year to this year, except for pretty much shooting more threes, I guess, and and getting better defensively from in that regard. But overall, I'm just very disappointed in NBA fans in general. Like, guys, what are we doing? Like, this is an all-time team so far through the playoffs and throughout the regular season, right? And it seems like everybody's doing everything that they can in their power to tear the team down. We should be building them up. I think defensively, what they bring to the table is awesome, right? I don't think it's a bad thing at all. They have physical guys, and the physicality, yeah, is a thing. But it's the playoffs. It's basketball. Like that's how it goes. And I get it. There's times when the whistle doesn't really look, too fair, I guess, in that regard. But it's also a perspective thing, right? Because I've heard the discourse, and we already talked about this way earlier in the season when the free throw merchant talks even
Right.
started, right? And like, bro, Shea drives so much to the freaking hoop. Of course, he's going to get fouled like what 2 to 3 times more than an average player who takes like half the drives or even more or less drives than him. Like, you know what I'm trying to say? So it's like
Yeah,
that
sure. And
that gets on my nerves when you talk about that. And with the defensive prowess, like they just have so many versatile defenders that I feel like people get a little overwhelmed and don't really know what to do. Like you have a guy like Lou Dort bothering you, you have a guy like Caruso bothering you, and J Dub as well. Like those are all very versatile, switchable defenders. Kassan Wallace, like they give superstars trouble on a nightly basis. So to people who are saying that they foul, they get away with all kinds of stuff, cut the crap, man. I don't believe it.
yeah, I mean, free throws attempts per game, 9 attempts per game. But we have seen in the postseason, right? We've seen other stars be able to get to the free throw line, what, like 8 to 10 times
Yeah,
a game. There's a lot of guys, and again, like there's gonna be calls where, yeah, probably shouldn't have been a foul. But we talked about it, right? Where his game offensively, he's a tricky guy to stay in front of, right? Because he's a very crafty, shifty ball handler. He can kind of switch hands and get and pull off different moves to his left and
it's
right
it's all about
quickly enough to
balance.
the point where you have to kind of be really disciplined and stay in front of him. And
Can't do it.
sometimes,
You
yeah,
can't do
it's
it.
going to lead. Yeah, and sometimes that'll lead to some bad calls, where you're trying to be aggressive defensively. But other times, just there's a reason this guy averages 30 a game.
It's a tough
In the
cover,
NBA.
bro. You can't
Yeah.
because every time you're guarding him, you're off balance. I don't think people understand how hard that is to guard. Like you're never really in a good defensive stance against him because he's either, like you said, going left, right, and then if you sag off, he has
Hmm.
a very smooth mid range. He shoots like 60% from the mid range. But then
Right.
if you play him tight, he's going to find a way to keep you off balance and get to the rack, right? And now the 3 point shot is coming around. Hadn't really shown up in the playoffs, but throughout the regular season, we did see him shoot the three ball better than he has in previous years. So it's a complete 3 level scorer's game, right?
Right. But that's where it's nice to have the mid range to go to because he's shooting 27% from three in the
Right.
playoffs on 5 attempts a game. But, you know, when you're talking about inside the arc, right? He's what, like a little over 50% on twos.
Right.
So, not
Efficient.
like crazy, but just as a whole, right? Like there is an element to his game where, we even with Brunson, right? Like that's a guy that gets to the free throw line a ton,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he's another guy that's like, kind of a tricky guy to
Mm-hmm.
guard, very tough, very physical. And that is going to result sometimes in him kind of having a favorable whistle. We've seen other stars in the past like that. But it is kind of funny in the playoffs, right? Where you can see all of these teams, they do have guys that can offensively go to something outside of just the three and the layup, right? The offense is like Indiana's got one of the most versatile offenses in the league,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the Knicks have guys that can do like Brunson, right? Can
Mm-hmm.
pretty much kind of score, from anywhere. Oklahoma City, right? Outside of SGA, most of the other guys are kind of, threes or layups. Jalen Williams can sometimes kind of pull up, right? But his offensive game, kind of like what Trent Miami Heat Network said, isn't right quite consistent,
Mhm.
to that point, right? Because he's a number two, and he's kind of like a learning young number
It's
two.
year
So
3. People forget
right.
that.
So
It's wild.
yeah. So if we're talking about the playoffs in general, right? Like with SGA, like do we feel like he's kind of elevated himself with this postseason so far?
No, but
Okay.
that's fine. That's okay because I think he was already in, such an elite tier, right? He's kind of just doing similar things to the regular season, but I don't think he's taken it to a different level, if that
Right.
makes any
Not
sense,
like
right?
an elite, like, there's not a lot of guys where they're like better in the playoffs than they are
Right.
in the regular season. I would say with his production, it's probably about online with what you would probably see from most stars,
Yeah.
where maybe it's like a little bit worse than the regular season. And like, yeah, like, you look at the efficiency, there's a drop off, but still, like, he's still very impactful, right? Like, they're not winning these games without what he's able to do. Um, so it's almost kind of like a good situation for him, right? Where it's like, he's not getting completely carried, right, by, other role players and guys in all these games. And he's not like, but he's also not having like a crazy, all-time dominant postseason. But I feel like as a whole, that evens out to being probably more of a positive
Yeah.
for him, right?
It's fine.
Like,
Like I said, not a bad thing.
right. Like if so like if he gets the title, that would probably, there would probably be people that would elevate him to like, is he the best point guard in the league? Because that hadn't really been the discourse, right? But like you said, it's not, he's not like raising his game necessarily in the playoffs, but he's showing up in all the big moments, right? Because like he showed up in game 7,
Mhm.
right? He showed up at the end of game 5,
Mhm.
right, against Denver. So that's what you want, right? So like you can clearly see he's a playoff guy. He's a gamer, right? And that's
Yeah.
kind of what you want to see. And most of the stars left in the playoff, all the main guys on these teams, I think, are gamers in the playoffs, right? Like Brunson, same thing. Ant, same thing. Halliburton, same thing. So that's kind of a good thing to see, and I think that's a good sign for all these teams going forward, right? And I don't think Minnesota's done. Like we both picked Oklahoma City to win the series, and I still feel good about it, right? But like, but Minnesota could still tie the series and potentially get back into it. But I do think it might be tough for them, right? Because of the fact that again they don't have a lot of great ball handling options
Mhm.
outside of Ant and Randall, and even those guys sometimes can be a little loose with the ball because they're not natural, point guard facilitators. Like they can pass,
Yeah.
right? But outside of that, it's Conley, right, who's 37, 38, had a positive plus minus, but
No,
wasn't
he wasn't
great in
good.
this. Although, like, he missed some open threes, but, like, it wasn't
Missed the
that
open
great in this.
layup too. It's just not good.
Yeah, right. And then obviously you got nothing from the bench. So, like, if you're Minnesota, to me, better bench contributions. I would say a much better game from Ant Man because I don't think he was that great in this
He
game.
was
Like he had a
horrible.
good first half, but I think second half pretty bad, and maybe part of that's the injury. But just as a whole, that to me would be the main thing. And you gotta find a way to keep Gobert on the floor because it just kind of feels like when he's not out there, like you're probably gonna be worse defensively. And but it's tough, right? Because you got to find ways offensively for him to make some type of impact, right? Like rolling to the rim. Can he get some putbacks? Can he get some dump offs? And we know offensively it's not great, right? He's kind of a limited offensive player skill set wise, but he feels like a guy where I think like you're gonna have to see if you can play him a decent amount, especially like if Nas Reed is just bad because he's been not that great for a while. Like he's had some games where he's hit some shots here and there, but offensively, he hasn't been super productive. I don't feel like in a while. Like we haven't had like a big 20 plus point Nas Reed game, in a while, right? So maybe we're waiting for that, from them. But I don't know. Like, which team do you think has more of an uphill battle? Would you say Minnesota?
Like who of like who's left in the playoffs?
I'm saying like, the Knicks and the Wolves have an uphill battle because they're
Oh,
down 0-1,
oh,
right? So
Timberwolves, 100%.
yeah, right. Yeah,
I
I'd say so
yeah,
too.
because like they got dismantled in the fourth quarter, like absolutely exposed to the point where it's like, you know, Anthony Edwards didn't really do too much, Julius Randle not too much, and then your bench, like you said, they didn't show up either. And I think the only saving grace here is that you probably won't expect all those role players to play like that again.
They,
So it
yeah,
could be a game, but you also have to account for the other side, right? What does Oklahoma City look like in game 2? What do they look like for the rest of the series? Because if you can't find a way to somewhat limit those guys, then I don't think you have a chance at winning the series because Chet had a very efficient game. J-Dub, he had his moments and showed up when it mattered and helped catalyze that
5
run.
steals,
Exactly,
5 steals.
exactly, and that's what I'm talking about. Like he helped catalyze that run that they really went on to really break out and take this game, and that's going to be an issue I think for Minnesota because you got to have some sort of consistency from your best player, and it
Mhm.
can't just be Julius Randle out there. That's just not going to fly.
Yeah, and the dichotomy of the 2 different games, right? Where you got one game where it's, where both teams were pretty low scoring. Yeah, I mean, I guess it was 64-60, so that's like a decent first half, with Oklahoma City and Minnesota. But just then on the other end, 138-135, right? 2 completely different types
Yeah,
of, matchups, right? Because obviously Oklahoma City and Minnesota are much better defensively than Indiana or the Knicks, right? Like those teams can at times defend, but that's not their main thing,
yeah,
right? So it's kind of a big thing there. Um, Also just a couple other mentions, right? Like Jaden McDaniels for Minnesota. Can't foul out.
yeah.
Can't be, in like single digits in terms of offensive production. Like he actually started the game off, I think, scoring their first what? I think all of his points were like in the first few possessions
I
and then
believe so.
did basically nothing for the rest of the game. He picked up 6 fouls. He fouled out. That can't happen, right? Because you need him defensively. He was kind of a big part of limiting SGA early on in the game. And that's also probably partly the whistle thing that some people have mentioned where it's like, how does he get 6 fouls? But then like, people mention like how does Alex Caruso or Lou Dort, not foul out? And like those guys pick up fouls. I think Lou Dort had 5. Um, and Hardenstein at 4, right? But just as a whole, if you're Minnesota, you can win, but you have to be better. Like, I don't think it comes down to just Oklahoma City mauled you and then SGA got a bunch of touch fouls. Like, because Minnesota was still winning, you know, and then, offensively, they just kind of fell apart. Like, I mean, Julius Randle having 5 turnovers and Anthony Edwards having 4 turnovers. I don't think that's because of the fouling. Like, it was just, if you go back and watch the possessions, right, it was kind of just, Randle backing a guy down and then somebody comes in and helps, forces the turnover, instant fast break.
Yeah,
So,
just lazy,
if you're
not paying
Minnesota, you
attention.
got to, yeah, you got to take care of the ball. I think you got to get some better shots because I know there's some second spectrum stuff about them having a bunch of open looks. It's just again, I don't know. I just feel like that's a little bit too much in terms of the offensive attack, and I think that's you're playing into Oklahoma City's hands doing that. Because like, yeah, like they're open, but Oklahoma City is very mobile and agile defensively. Like so, the way they can close out, like it might not look like a guy is like completely, is being super contested, but like somebody's kind of lurking.
Yeah, they
I
got
don't know. How
length,
to
bro.
describe
It's scary. I know what
it.
you
Yeah,
mean.
yeah,
It's like they have a
exactly.
weird, awkward defensive radius. It's the weirdest thing ever. Like you look at J-Dub,
Right.
he's a guy that can attack closeouts like a freaking monster. You got Lou Dort. I think his radius kind of is like a weird gravitational pull. Caruso as well. Like they're just a bunch of menaces, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then shout out Kenrich Williams, right, who came
Yeah.
in and went 3 for 3, didn't really play much at all in the postseason before this. And, Jalen Williams, the center, right, he didn't play at all. Right. And it's funny because he played early on in the Denver series and then didn't really play down the stretch. Then Williams comes in and then OKC goes small, for a decent stretch of that second half. So, impressive game 1 by Oklahoma City. Um, do we think Minnesota bounces back game 2, like and pulls off a win, or do they just go down 0-2?
I think they go down 0-2.
Okay.
And that's the thing, right? I think I'm probably the lowest on the Timberwolves because I don't know. I just feel like they're probably the only team here that was overperforming before they got here, right? I feel like a lot of people didn't really, um, you know, scratch them in to be in this position, and I feel like you're kind of seeing why. Granted, it's only been one game, but the lack of consistency, the lack of Gobert being an offensive threat, Jaden McDaniels not being, the third option that I think they're kind of low key counting on him to be. Naz Reid not shooting well. It feels like more so the Minnesota from the beginning of the season, right? Because DiVincenzo's being, wildly inefficient. But then also Anthony Edwards, he didn't show up in this game. Do I think he'll show up later in the series? Yeah, probably, but not game two. I think, Oklahoma City's, they're going to be pretty spectacular at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think it'll be close all the way throughout, or do you think it might just be just like a wipeout?
I think it's going to be
It
a
just
close.
ended up being
I
a
think
blowout,
I,
but
I think
you
it's
know.
going to be closer.
Mm-hmm.
Just because like I said, I don't expect Minnesota's role players to have back-to-back games where they quite literally don't give you anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, and it's funny, right? Because defensively, right, Oklahoma City was really also keyed in on Randall, right? Because obviously, in the first half, right, I think they were, kind of just like we'll let him kind of do his own thing, right? Because he, and then that allowed him to get off, and then in the second half, they pretty much took him out. I think he had 20 in the first half, so really only 8 the rest of the way. But Randall did the work in the first half, right? Like, so you don't really blame him. It's just kind of like you needed Ant to, I think, kind of carry you the second half, especially with Randall doing most of the heavy lifting. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens in game two. I feel like we could see a better game from Minnesota for sure. I just think it's tough. I just think it's the tough matchup for them, even though it was close. But I do think whistle wise, I think it'll be a different whistle in game two. But I think Oklahoma City can still win. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Then, I guess just kind of as a quick nod, right? SGA, we can talk a little about more about that. He won the MVP, right? This season. 33 a game, 5 rebounds, 6 assists. 57 effective field goal percentage, 30 PER, 17 win shares, right? Just kind of crazy. Great season from a guard. That was our pick to win the MVP. How do we feel about it? Obviously I know playoffs not the same as a regular season, and it's a regular season award. Do we still feel good about it?
Yeah, I love it. It's
Yeah.
deserved, and I think this was a special race because you had such a close competitive race between two generational talents, right? You have a guy like Nikola Jokic, and you have a guy in Shea, and the race was tight, and I don't love the tearing down of each of these players, right, from the perspective supporters of each of them. Like the Shea fans have been going off on Jokic, saying he plays no defense, and the Jokic fans have been calling Shea a free throw merchant, all that stuff. Like I think there was a case to be made for both of these guys, right? But I think it always goes to the best player on the best team, in my perspective. That's just my opinion, and I think that's what it came down to, right? You look at what the Thunder were able to accomplish in the regular season, and look at what Shea was able to accomplish in the regular season, right? His numbers were wild, and Jokic's were too. But I think the impact that Shea had on that Thunder team is ridiculous. When you're the leader of a team that is that good and that overwhelming throughout the regular season to the point where you're pretty much the favorite no matter what matchup you're walking into, I think that's a super special feat, and I think you're in elite company.
Yeah, because Vegas has Oklahoma City as decent favorites to win it all and pretty much, kind of finish this off the rest of the
Yes.
postseason, right? Like they're what at this point 9-3 in the playoffs, right?
Yeah.
That's really good,
Very
right?
good.
I mean, that's kind of in line with what we saw in the regular season. Obviously, the 3 losses came in the same series. Could have lost that series
Sure.
potentially, if Denver was not quite as banged up. But this was what we talked about, where like that 7-game series that might have been the moment for them, right? Like we talked about like last year, right? Like they got beat last year by Dallas, right? Like they were favored to win that series, could have won the series, but they didn't. And some of those guys didn't show up, but that experience I think helped them out this year. And now you're seeing it pay off in the postseason. And like, yeah, you're still going to get some stinky performances from some of the supporting cast because they're young, they're inexperienced, and they're inconsistent, right? But this is right. But again, those are the type of games that like we needed to see them pull off in the postseason to make us feel good about could they actually make the finals and potentially win it all. We didn't have neither of us had them winning the title going into the season, right? We had them certainly coming out of the West, right? And they're well on their way to do that. And it kind of feels like they're probably the best team right now of the teams left.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Shea,
Yeah,
top
Shea,
dog.
top dog. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, like, when you say top dog, that pretty much means best player in the league, and
You think he is?
I think there's a case for it.
Hmm.
Um, look at the guy's numbers, right? 32 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, and he also plays some freaking defense, right? Like, that's the cool part. It doesn't always show up in the box score, right? Because I think there's more to defense than just simple stocks, but
Right,
what he brings to that Oklahoma City system is wild, right? It's really fun to watch. I think there's aspects of his game where he's not the greatest table setter, but that's really not his job. His job is to take over a game, drop 30, and get out of there with a win. And that's
right.
what he's
So
able to do. Like, it's wild.
yeah, so we'll see what happens with Oklahoma City as we go on. So now he'll be eligible to sign 5-year extension next summer, I believe, right? Worth 380 million.
Wow. That's wild.
Crazy.
Dude, inflation is crazy. Like, these
Yeah.
numbers just keep going up and up. Wow.
Yeah. So that
Wow.
means that he'll be like in that 70 plus million a year tier, right?
Wow. That's wild. That's
Yeah.
crazy, bro. Wow.
Yeah. So
Over
that
five
yeah, so
years. Wow.
that'll put him in the highest, paid player in the league
Yep.
basically status,
We
right?
get
So
that pretty much every year now. It's wild.
oh yeah, because somebody, wait until the Wemby extension.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be crazy. Oh, my God.
Yeah, if, assuming he can stay healthy.
Yeah. Hopefully, prayers.
But yeah, but then just kind of a quick point, the all rookie teams.
Mm. Hmm.
What do we think of that list? So first team, Stephon Castle, that was the rookie of the year. Zach Edey, Memphis Grizzlies, right? Risa Shea, Atlanta Hawks. Alex Sarr, Washington Wizards. Jalen Wells, Memphis Grizzlies. That's your first team. And then the second team, Matas Bucelas, Bub Carrington, Donovan Clingan, Yves Misi, and Kalel Ware.
I mean, I don't really disagree. Unfortunately, there Jared McCain would have, I think, made that list, had he had been healthy.
Mhm.
But overall, you can't really hate on it. I think this rookie class, got a lot of hate coming in, but I think they're coming out with a lot of respect, right? Considering, there's a lot of role players, on some young and hungry teams, right? Like, a lot of people's stock on Stephon Castle has gone up. A lot of people's stock on Alex Sarr has gone up. Risa Shea, like all these top picks. I think the vision of what they become has become a lot clearer just through one season, right? And because people really didn't know what a lot of these guys were going to look like, right? Was Stephon Castle going to be, more of a one? Seems like he's going to be more of a 2/wing guy, depending on if his jumper, comes to fruition. And then also like a guy like Alex Sarr, right? Is he going to be a power forward or a center? Either way, he's a special rim protector. That's awesome. And yeah, it's cool. And, I do want to plug my Wizards. Shout out to them for having 2 all rookie guys, because I think that's pretty cool to have, right? In a draft class that was labeled as weak.
List wise, I'm pretty sure my first and second team was about the same. I think the difference was I had Kalel. I think I did not. I didn't have Edey on first team. I had him as the second team,
Okay.
and then I had Isaiah Collier instead of, I believe, Bucelis.
Okay. Yeah, like I'm not mad at it though, but there's a lot of
No,
underrated guys I feel like, that I'm super excited for their year 2 campaign.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then shout out to Dallas, right, for probably getting the preemptive Rookie of the Year pick next year with
Yeah.
with Cooper Flag. We'll see where that goes
Yeah,
from here on out. But
shout out to them.
yeah, but
Dude, like screw
just
that,
just
bro.
yeah, just absolutely wild. But yeah, you know what? First couple of games that we had in the conference final so far, right? Seemingly, I think going to be really fun series. We'll see if the losing teams can bounce back in their game twos, right? I
Yep.
believe game two of Oklahoma City and Minnesota will be Thursday, right? I guess we're Thursday morning East Coast now, but like Thursday, night.
Sure.
And then game two for Knicks Pacers should be Friday night, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, sir.
So
Yep.
so we'll see what happens going on there. But yeah, crazy series. And then of course, obviously, pretty much all the main guys, right, will be competing for their first NBA championships, right? So it feels
Amazing.
like might be in a new era now compared to what it was the first half of the decade, right? Because pretty wild. Now we're halfway through the 2020s. So
Yeah,
we'll
it's
see what
crazy.
happens with this.
It's
new
crazy.
crop of guys.
Yeah. Well, we're just about at that hour mark. So that's probably our time to sign off. We appreciate all you guys coming in here. I think the viewership was way better than expected. Shout out to Miami Heat Zone, shout out to Miami Heat Network, shout out to Mr. Pops, shout out to Keith Wells, and shout out to Najee, the chosen one. All your guys' comments were amazing. It helped facilitate this amazing discussion. More streams will be on the way. Can't confirm when or where, but they will be on the way. So once again, before we do get out of here, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates. And we will see you guys on the next stream. New episode will come out Friday. See y'all.